Welcome to the Team EF Coaching Performance Podcast, where we take information from the highest level of sport and make it accessible for all cyclists. I'm your host, Zack Morris, and in this episode, we're sitting down with the man, the myth, the mystery, the legend, none other than the Mr. Lachlan Morton. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, mate. Quite an introduction.
Right.
Hope I can live up to the hype.
I mean, you kind of already have, right? You did the Tour de France by yourself and slept in a few ditches and really earned your stripes,
Yeah, I've given it a crack.
So what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm good. Just day 5 of training camp now. So yeah, been out training with the boys on the road, which has been a long time between drinks for me. So yeah, it's been a nice week. Definitely a different environment than I've been in the last year or so, but it's been nice to be back around the team.
What makes it a different environment? The fact that you've just been kind of off doing your own thing and now you're in the world tour setting with all the guys over here?
Yeah, it's anything to do with the World Tour team. It's a lot of people involved. It's everyone from the soigneurs to mechanics, to the staff doing logistics and management. It's a big operation, and generally nowadays when I'm going to a race, it's just myself and Tom Hopper or just me. So I mean, I enjoy being in the team environment. It's really interesting to see how far the sport's evolved from the first training camp I was involved with on a team like 10 years ago to what it is now. It's kind of like increasingly becoming Formula One,
Right? You see the EF team transitioning that way.
yeah. I mean, the whole sport, it's kind of, the level is so much higher all the time. And, what drives that higher level is, advancements in bike technology, tires, wheels, aerodynamics, and then obviously the training side of things and nutrition. The whole thing is just like, it used to be very like if you were doing a training camp in December when I started, it was like people were kind of like on their first rides and
Right.
no real thought process went into anything. And um, there wasn't a huge amount of planning involved for the season. It was just kind of like, all right, go to the camp and see some sponsors and, turn the legs around. And then that was kind of it. Whereas now it's like, all right, you come to training camp and there's a meeting with like your directors to plan like your calendar, with your coaches, with the mechanics, like to get the bike stuff sorted out, with the nutritionists, the doctors, the chiros, like the gym stuff.
The
It's like
finance guy.
the finance guy, that the whole bit, man. It's like it's an amazingly productive week. So it's really cool to see it all play out. And yeah, as I said, it's just like night and day to where the sport was 10 years ago.
It's a bit of an interesting transition year for you though, because you've been racing on the world tour up until this coming season.
Yeah.
And I guess it was you that decided to kind of step back and focus more on the alternative stuff this year. So what's the situation there and how do you
Yeah, I
feel about
mean,
that?
I've slowly done less and less world tour racing. I think in my own head, uh, I stopped being a world tour rider a few years ago. I mean, I know what it requires to be a world tour cyclist, and it requires all of your dedication and attention. And my attention's been spread like over a bunch of different things. Still everything within cycling, but I haven't been able to focus everything just on going fast on the road bike in a number of years. And I think it was time to just kind of let someone fill that role, because there are plenty of people out there who are willing to focus all their time on just doing that. Uh, and I'm in like a nice position where I can still be within the team, but essentially just kind of have the space to do the things I really want to do, and the things that motivate me, and yeah, still be, I guess, under the banner of EF, without doing world tour events.
What do you want to do? What does motivate you?
Oh, man, there's so much out there I'd still love to do on a bike. I think like at the moment, I kind of have like this renewed competitive drive that I definitely lost for a little while. At the moment, I want to win some races.
What
And
kind of races?
I mean, the races that I'm having the most fun in at the moment are kind of on the gravel and on my mountain bike. And there's like a flourishing scene. I mean, all over the world, but especially in the US. That race scene has really grown and developed into kind of a calendar on its own. So I'm interested in exploring like what it takes to be really competitive at those events and kind of focusing in on like the big races like Unbound and Leadville, and seeing just kind of how far I can push that.
Well,
And beyond that, I think like there's still so many things like on the side, like records or ultras that I'm still yet to do. That like it's a long list. I'm trying to tick a few off each year.
right. Did you win the Tour of California?
No, I won Tour of Utah.
Tour of Utah,
Yeah.
right? So I think people may have forgotten just how freaking talented you are on a bike. Like in the world tour scene at the highest level, like if you were 100% focused on that, you'd probably still be a great asset to any team. So
Yeah, but I mean, I'm also aware that like that your ability is like a small piece of the puzzle, and like to be competitive as a world tour athlete, if I even if I have the physical tool, I don't have the other tools. You
yeah,
know, like the tools being like I struggle mentally to focus
that
on
is a
that.
tool. Yeah,
No, it
fair
is a
play.
tool, and
Yeah,
like I'm very comfortable in like admitting those shortcomings, and I think like the second that I did admit to myself that I didn't have those capabilities, like everything became easier,
right.
because I'm like, I have this ability still to ride my bike, but I can focus it and channel it in a lot of different ways that are, um, on a personal level, just like very satisfying and, as have helped me grow as a person. But then I think also like my contribution to cycling has been greater through doing different things than it would have been if I just kind of tried to fit myself into the world tour box when it's probably a box I wasn't made to go in.
I guess what I'm interested to see is now that if you are going to focus on like gravel racing and you
Yeah.
do, like you said, want to win those gravel events, if we take what you have done in pro cycling and apply it to gravel, you'd probably be pretty good at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been competitive in it. It's like a kind of discipline that I like. I think it's a hard. I mean, I like the fact that it's not as clear cut as road racing. The demands, the events are all quite different. So some are 10 hours long, some are 3 hours long. Um, some are very technical, some are like closer to a road race. So I think it's still a challenge to prepare yourself for each event, because the demands are very different. But I think that favors me because I'm used to like chopping and changing events. Like this year, I did like a 3 day FKT one weekend, and then the next weekend did like a 2 hour mountain bike race. And I'm used to what it takes to like turn around and kind of do those different things. So I'm hoping that kind of works in my favor.
Right.
Um, but I'm also just interested. I enjoy the process of having goals and working towards them. Um, and I think the last few seasons I've been trying to do just everything and haven't really been able to have time to like sit down and be like, okay, these are my goals. And now I'm going to set a roadmap to try and achieve it.
That's
So
exciting.
yeah, I'm like, it's just a different challenge. I think I'm constantly trying to make myself a little bit uncomfortable with whatever I'm doing, because I think that's important. It's important to for your own personal growth. I think it's also important to stay motivated and fresh, like to have something that's a little bit scary. And
Constantly got to step outside the comfort zone.
yeah,
It's
and
the
I
only
mean, for
way.
me, that was the reason I went into doing riding off road or ultra stuff. Whereas, you know, I definitely felt like this season I was very comfortable in that. and it would have been easy to be like, oh, okay, I can just go and do an ultra race every year and, do a few off road events. And that was too comfortable again. So I was
Right.
like, all right, I need to like set some competitive goals to like mix it up and do something that's a bit scary.
So, with some clear objectives in mind, do you see yourself changing the way you're structuring your workouts and building towards the events and trying to
Yeah.
reach a bit more of a peak? Or how do you see yourself structuring that?
Yeah. I've overhauled like my training in the last 2 months. Before that, I spent 3 years looking after my own training. And that was more out of the like the uncertainty of my calendar, and kind of that it was very hard to sit down and have a plan, and it could become frustrating for any coach, to be
Right.
like, oh, actually no, I'm going to go and do a 2-day backpacking race, like, you know a month out from the Giro, and
Right.
every coach is like, you can't. um
Yeah.
so I enjoyed that process of getting to know my body more, and trying to work out what I could do basically to be uh, an athlete who could take on a bunch of different disciplines and different durations and intensities, and kind of worked out a formula that worked for me. But it kind of meant I was never specialized enough in anything to really excel in any discipline. I could
Yeah.
kind of do everything,
Hmm.
but nothing super well. And so now I'm trying to hone in on, like, yeah, going back to basics with intervals, and um, have, yeah, got myself a coach, and basically I've been out of the game too long. Like, coaching's come so far in the
Hmm.
last 3 years that,
Yeah.
like, the intervals I was doing before, they just seem like ancient now. Like, I was just doing the classic, like, 3-day block. First day I would just do 3 15-minute threshold efforts, a 3-hour ride. Second day, 4 hours strength efforts, and then an endurance ride. And they just do that to death. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it
Just
just
rinse and repeat, baby.
exactly.
Yeah.
And now, like, there's all this different stuff with, like, variance in cadence, and, like, you know, you might do a 20-minute effort, but you might train like all four different zones in there,
Yeah.
and like that's been kind of eye opening in a way, but also refreshing. Like, to
Yeah.
go out there, and for 2 years, basically, the only plan I had when I left home, I didn't have any plan. Like, I would just be like, I would think of like, okay, I want to go into this area, so my ride's gonna involve, like, I'll just work out how to get there,
Right.
and like it's dictated by what bike I'm on.
Get out there, hit a medium,
Yeah,
get the heart rate up a bit.
yeah, and like there was no real training aspect to it. I mean, like, there no training goal to it.
Right.
Don't target. I just kind of looked at duration and occasionally would sprint up a hill, but like there
Yeah.
was nothing really focused to it. So that's been nice, and I've found like a nice middle ground where I still ride like that 2 or 3 times a week when it makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, I rest and look after myself a bit better,
Yeah.
because I've realized that in order to absorb any work, I actually have to let my body
But
rest.
I'm a huge fan of that structure because a lot of our athletes, they want the 7 day a week plan,
Yep.
but for some more experienced athletes, you really only want like three crucial structural workouts throughout the course of a week.
Yep.
More work than that can be too much work, and you lose that aspect
Yeah.
in which you just enjoy riding.
Yeah, and I think like when I go into a workout, let's say I have two structured workouts in the week,
Hmm.
and they're both, I would consider those like the key workouts of the week, right? That's where
Yeah.
you're trying to move the needle. And I need to come into that fresh and ready enough mentally and physically to like just execute that.
Right.
right? And it's like on that day, that's the goal. And I enjoy the process of getting ready for that. I enjoy the difficulty of the workout because my body's ready for it. And then I allow my body to recover from that. But then beyond that, there is flexibility for different styles of riding, different durations and intensities, as long as they don't impact those workouts, right? So that's kind of how I go about it. And I think, on those longer days or on those unstructured days, it's really good to understand your own body,
Yeah.
because it is like, the coach brings the expertise and the science behind training someone's body, you know, given outputs and heart rate and basic metrics. But there's always a metric that involves a person being present enough to understand how they're feeling.
Well, the interesting thing about cycling is it's really hard to build that awareness, right? I think it's pretty straightforward for somebody that goes to the gym, for example. They
Sure.
say, "Okay, I want to build my biceps." Well, you go and you pick up a
Yeah.
weight that you can physically pick up and you do some bicep curls. Well, if you want to build your legs, maybe you go over to the squat rack and you pick a weight that you can do some squats with and you go up and down, right? But an athlete doesn't necessarily conceptualize how to develop strength in a standing body position or how to
Sure.
develop a more efficient cadence range, right?
Yeah.
Developing efficiency at 65 RPM is very different than developing efficiency at 110 RPM.
Yeah.
But to be a bike racer, you have to be efficient at all
All
these
of those
different
things.
things, right?
Yeah.
So the coach can definitely point out those. We don't like to use the word weaknesses. We like to use the word opportunities,
Yeah.
right? So the coach can point out those opportunities, and then on your easy days, you're definitely like really cementing those things that you've worked on the harder days
Yeah.
and feeling all of these changes that are coming into your body and really cementing those abilities into your cycling skill set.
Yeah, and I use those longer days now as a lot of it I'll do off road or on my mountain bike, and I find I end up working all of those zones like you're talking about, varying cadences, varying intensities, and varying skills just all the time. So as you said, it's like becomes an opportunity with a little bit of focus or just a bit of awareness around what you're doing. Like every bit of writing you do is practice,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
It just requires like as I said, a bit of awareness. And I think like at the end of the day with cycling, it just rewards consistency,
Yeah.
and all of those different small skills and I guess like physical abilities that you need to put together to have like a complete performance. Um, they're only they're only developed through time and dedicated practice. It's not a magic.
Yeah.
Like I wish it was more simple, but it's just kind of you have to do it.
So I want to ask you about a little bit of the details of gravel racing, the rhythm of gravel racing. How much does gravel racing favor the highest fat burning zone diesel engine as opposed to what we have in road racing today, which is the F1 engine, where the athlete has a great endurance zone, but also is very efficient at using glycogen and being very explosive in critical moments. How would you compare the two?
I think it's shifted because the gravel racing is becoming faster, so that demand is becoming closer to a road event. I don't think it's on the same level, like that critical 5 to 10, even 20-minute power that you see in elite level road racing or even mountain biking isn't an absolute requirement in those races in order to make it to the front. Because one, like the duration of the races is generally longer. So you can't really make efforts like that without paying for it at some point.
Right.
Um, and you need that uh, resistance to duration, you know?
Yeah.
That being said, it's coming closer. I think in gravel racing, you still need to be able to put the power down for 10 minutes to make those selections. But I think it's less about like if I look at a power file from a World Tour road race and uh, let's say a race like Unbound, the amount of time you spend above 600 watts in a road race is really significant. You know, you might spend like 20 minutes in that area, accumulated time.
Right.
Whereas in Unbound, you might spend, even though the race is 12 hours long, you might spend a minute there,
Right.
you know, and that's where the real difference is. That being said, I think that's why the gravel racing probably favors me better. That's naturally, I'm more of a diesel, and just given the events that I've done in the last 3 years, like that my engine kind of works that way. Um, so I still have to work the explosive. Like if I look at my opportunities, I
Yeah.
guess now, like which I have done extensively over the last month, it's all in that 10 minutes and less, like trying to burn glycogen
W-
more efficiently.
what's interesting is where we're seeing right now the biggest gains in all of our athletes in those zones is in the gym.
Yeah,
So we're able to, we look at a gym set, let's say, for example, a 8 repetition set, which would be a heavy set. We're now getting into the nervous system, right?
yeah,
Heavy, good form, obviously. But if that takes about a minute, that's pretty much the equivalent to doing an all out 1 minute effort on the bike.
sure.
And so if you do 4 exercises and 4 sets, well, now you've done 16 minutes of all out efforts on
Yeah,
the bike. And so where a lot of people go wrong with the gym training is they go out and they try to do, threshold efforts the next day. And that's not necessarily
no, it won't
good
work.
because now you're doing muscular damage to a muscle that's trying to repair itself.
Yeah,
But this is also a big part of this zone 2 training that we're hearing is people think, oh yeah, I'll just go and ride like 10 hours of zone 2 and I'll be really fast, right? But the secret to the zone 2 is actually the gym training.
right, right,
So for athletes who are really trying to build those explosive abilities, in our business anyways, we've really seen the people benefiting the most from the weights,
right.
which in the past was like nobody would touch weights,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. They're scared of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think when we look at those kind of changes in rhythm of the race, I think Unbound would maybe be like one side of the spectrum. And then on the more extreme side of the spectrum, I wasn't in the race, so I'm kind of guessing here. But I'd say when we see something like UCI Gravel World Championships,
yeah.
it would be like the more kind of
Explosive.
explosive side of that. So what was that race like this year?
Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, that's totally the opposite because we started directly up a 2K climb that
That was
had
nuts.
a single track, well, not a single track, but a very small gravel path that
Yeah.
was race deciding.
Yeah. Was it?
Yeah, so essentially you had to start and do your best 5 minute power. So I think the first 5 minutes of the race was like well over 400 watts for me.
Oh my gosh. And were
You
you
know,
warmed up?
no, and I
Oh
had to
man.
start at the back, so I was just like,
Brutal.
um, and so that like with that effort I did there was something I hadn't done the whole year.
Oh
It
man.
just was like I
I,
was having to pull on like
I didn't know
the
that
old World Tour
backstory,
years,
man.
yeah, and then like you then have to put that into. So I made up like a decent amount there, but I was probably still only got to the top 40, and then had to pull on like the technical skills that I've managed to like work on the last few years to then make the front group in the next technical section, which was 20K. Um, and then from there, it was really just sprinting out of corners and very much like a Belgian style road race, you know.
yeah.
But I actually I enjoyed it because it was like a big throwback for me. Um, and the first 60K of the course were really good.
Okay.
After that, it got pretty boring on the bike paths.
Yeah.
But totally different. Like again, the duration of the race, I want to say it was 5 hours or less, maybe four
And
and a half
and no
hours.
like aid station stops, right?
No, absolutely not. There was a moment. There was one feed zone early on, and I'd like just tagged the back of the front group, and at this point it was only like 20 riders, and I
Oh
was like,
wow.
I've done well here to get here. And Sagan was in front of me,
Yeah.
and he was just like, it was really strung out and windy, and there was like a feed zone, and we'd only because we just had Tom Hopper come to help us.
Okay.
Like we didn't have a huge amount of staff,
Right.
so we knew we could only hit 2 feed zones. And it's like I could see him, and he had 2 bottles, and I was like, if I miss this, it's going to be 80K till I get another bottle. But I was like, if I take this bag, I'm not going to make the group. And Sagan took a bottle, and he got dropped, and I skipped the bag, and I just made the group, and I was just like, okay, I guess that's the call. Unfortunately, like the race, then 2 guys slipped away, and everything stopped, and it all came back together.
Right.
And then I was just super thirsty.
Dude.
but it was totally different. Like we're literally going like 50K an hour through a feed zone, which like in a lot of those other races when it's like an aid station, it's kind of like an agreement, people stop, and then
Right.
like there was absolutely none of that. It was like cutthroat, like old school racing.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you're out there for 10 hours and everybody realizes that like dying on course is potentially an option from
Yeah,
dehydration, right?
exactly.
Like, just like, all right,
Exactly.
boys, we're going to race hard, but we're not going to die today.
Yeah, totally.
So,
And also, like, I'm sure Vanderpoel had like 10 bottle hand ups.
oh, really?
Like there's definitely that element,
Yeah.
to where like the
We're,
support.
we're still the underdog.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
there's always those factors. So, I mean, after doing it, I mean, I know you already said there that you thought it was really cool, but what do you think about like the UCI gravel series now?
I think it's good. I think like um I think the US scene is kind of like where it started, right? And I think it can still continue to flourish separately, and I hope it does. I think the UCI is kind of trying to put together a series in different places that will, open up gravel racing to more people, and I hope that's what happens. If that's an opportunity that more people can go and race gravel races, then great. It doesn't have to be threatening, and people can recognize that as the world championship or not. But uh, yeah, I mean, I don't really. I try to be like, I'm not very political, right?
Yeah.
I know that the UCI could do a lot of things better, you know, um, but at the same time, they are the governing body of the sport, and I think the World Championship event was cool because you did have the actual best cyclists in the
Right.
world compete on the gravel course,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, and if like there is a racer in the US who races gravel, um, who wants to go up against Vanderpoel in a gravel race and see how they stack up, there's a platform to do that,
Yeah.
which I think that's cool. Um,
I think that's a great opportunity for if we have a breakout rider in the US, for example, and he would never get the opportunity to make the big selection of a world tour team, but can go and prove himself against a guy like Vanderpool. Well, guess who's going to get a world tour contract the following year if that's what they want to do, right?
yeah, and I think as long as it remains open and accessible to a lot of different people, like to compete, as long as it doesn't become something where you need to be affiliated with a team or of a certain level. I think if it becomes overly restrictive, then okay, you've lost something. But in the iteration that I got to race this year, I thought it was a good event.
So, just to your point there about like the best bike racers in the world coming out, I think if we're really thinking about growing the sport, right? I think this is a big value, right? All of a sudden, you've got so many people who are fans of those individuals from the road now watching gravel, and maybe they've never watched a gravel race before, and maybe that inspires them to get a new bike and do gravel and attend more events and all of those things. So I kind of looked at it from that perspective where I said, "Hey, this is, an opportunity for growth for everyone."
Yeah, and I mean it's a different experience, right? I think if you're looking to go out there and just like ride a beautiful course and have a epic day out with some friends on a gravel bike, like
Right.
don't go to the UCI Gravel World Championships,
Yeah.
Like if you want to have an agreement to stop at the aid station and fill the bottles together and be friends out there. Like, don't go to these gravel championships. Like
It's not what it's
if you're out there, you got to have your elbows out and be ready to race.
Right.
Like, and in some ways, it was refreshing to jump into an environment like that where you're like, okay, I can just be like the asshole bike rider,
Totally
basically. You know what
cutthroat.
I mean?
It's
Like,
on, yeah.
just like get out there and go for it, and like anything goes in a way. But at the same time, I don't think having that impacts the people who don't want the competitive element. I think the same thing with like the bigger races in the US. They are getting more competitive, and if you're racing in that front group, that environment becomes less about recreation and leisure and more about performance.
Yeah.
And when it becomes about that, yes, those environments become more aggressive and for some people less enjoyable.
Yeah.
Like myself included. If I'm not in the mood, sometimes I hate that. But if I'm in the mood, I really sometimes thrive in that,
Yeah.
But you can still go to those events and not race in that front group and have whatever experience you want to,
Right.
I think as long as the industry as a whole doesn't just focus on that front end,
Yeah.
because I think that's traditionally what's happened in road racing,
Mm.
which has led to a number of problems that I think have driven people to go ride off road. Like
What?
it's a hard balance. It's
Yeah.
like it's one of those things that I don't want to have too much of an opinion on where it should go because I think it's grown really organically and I think it should continue to grow organically. I just as long as everyone involved has a voice, like this
Yeah.
is me talking as someone who comes from a racing background and I'm comfortable in a racing environment. It might be totally different if I hear from someone who is first timer and they just get put off simply by the fact that there are very competitive athletes on the start line. I
I,
think
I think you're really, really unique in that sense though, where like you're a very high level pro rider who also can just like go out and have a good time.
right.
Like not many guys can check out like that. Like I personally, man, and I never even raced at the level you did. I cannot see the sport through that lens of going out and having a good time. Like I've got to like every time I go out and do intervals, like I just see bike racing.
Yeah, and I have no judgment on anyone like from what they want to do, with the racing, as long as it doesn't impact anyone else.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, if you need the intervals as motivation to get out the door and ride your bike, and that's like an integral part of your experience racing, or even if it's not to get out, even if you love just having some horrible workout to do on your trainer in your basement, like,
Yeah.
and that's what gets you stoked to get on and ride, then like good for you,
Yeah.
like power to you. Like, even though that's so far removed from my idea of a good time,
Yeah.
like that's cool.
Yeah.
You're another person who's on team bikes.
Yeah.
Like, um,
Exactly.
and yeah, I think I've had enough varied experiences to where like I grew up as someone who was hyper competitive
You're right.
and very driven. Like, as a 15-year-old kid at school, I was training 30 hours a week and going to school, wake up at 4:30 every morning, and if I didn't win the race, I cried,
Yeah.
like I was,
I was at 15, I was the same.
yeah, and I still like now I will never be as nervous as I was lining up for like a state time trial title at
Right.
14 years old.
Yeah.
Like there will never be anything in my life that makes me that nervous.
I
And
can relate to that so much.
right, and I
Yeah.
just like I grew up in that, and it wasn't driven by anyone. Like my parents were very supportive but never pushy. But like I've experienced that,
Right.
right? So then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I also want to experience something else.
Yeah.
But bikes were the only kind of lens I had for experiencing things, and so
Okay.
luckily I was able to use my bike to then just go out and have a good time,
Yeah, that's
and
really
and
cool.
be able to meet people who do experience bikes through that way. And I don't know, I can kind of share that with them. So Yeah, that's I mean, that's the beauty of bikes, really. Like every single like ride I go on, I like to think it's like you're creating something for yourself. So you get to choose the route, you get to choose the way you go about riding that route, and you get to create an experience. And you have ownership over that. And all you need is the bike to do it. So if that experience is, as I said, an extreme one or a leisurely one or a recreational one, like, that's totally up to you. And you have the power to like create that experience.
Team bikes.
Yeah, exactly. Team bikes.
Well, I think we can all agree that, gravel is great for the sport, gets more people out there. If they're having a good time, great. If they want to race, there's a place for them as well.
Yeah.
And a part of all of it, if you want to have a really good time and do better at your event, you should probably do some training before your event,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Yeah,
I've I've been on I've been on both ends. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
I've
absolutely.
I've done events I'm like super prepared for, and your ability to have the experience you want is easier because like in a race terms can be dictated to you.
Yeah,
If you're trying to race at the front, things can be dictated to you, and the more prepared you are, the more you can dictate it to others. you know, like you can enforce an experience on someone else.
so if you don't want to get bossed around all day, do your intervals.
Yeah, but I mean, even at the other end, like if you want to go out there and still be able to smile and be happy after 6 hours bouncing on a gravel road, like yeah, you still need to be prepared.
Right.
You know.
Awesome. Well, Lachlan, you've got a busy schedule.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. That was awesome, man.
no worries. Anytime.